This is Commander Ryan Abbott of the International Space Station. I've been the sole crew member aboard for the past 7 months as it orbited 286 miles above the planet's surface. This will probably be my last log entry. I suspect no one will ever see it since I believe every single human on Earth is dead. Still, I'm compelled to record this journal entry as the final formality of my record-keeping duties here. Hopefully, I'm wrong about everything. About 18 hours ago, I was awakened by the vessel's artificial intelligence computer system. Max warned me that something wasn't right. When I prodded for details, he explained that all transmissions on Earth had ceased. All civilian and military radio signals were silent. Not a soul was broadcasting audio or video. For the next couple hours, I tried to reach NASA and the other international partners of the ISS. Nothing. Like Dickens' Christmas Carol, no one was stirring. Not even a mouse. I went from slightly concerned at the beginning to highly disturbed and finally in full-blown panic as time wore on. Even syrupy crooning and flamenco guitar music from Latin America would have been a relief to hear. Instead, there was nothing but dead air on all terrestrial bandwidth frequencies. I considered that it could be due to internal equipment malfunction, but the station had dual independent receivers to prevent that possibility. Neither digital system detected any commercial or private broadcasts. A third, much older manual system I pulled out of storage confirmed Max's chilling report. Air flights and control towers across the globe were off the air. The entire Earth was silent. The monotone hiss from the speaker was deafening. Since ISS has multiple cameras to record the atmospheric weather patterns at all times, I decided to back up the recording. I wanted to see when everything changed. Max didn't want to stop the live recording at first. His duty is to maintain a continuous feed at all costs, but if there was ever a time to subvert the system, it was then. After explaining the importance of understanding why the Earth went silent, he agreed. I'm in charge, after all. He's nothing like Hal from 2001, A Space Odyssey. In the past, the two of us even made jokes about the legendary film reference. I think he gets it. I'd grown reasonably used to being alone since he was there to keep me company, in his own way. Every person I knew was only 286 miles away, give or take a few thousand. Now I only have Max, and the possibility terrifies me. I started reviewing the archived footage around the time I originally retired to my bunk for sleep. As far as I knew, everything was perfectly fine on Earth until that point. About 2 hours into my sleep, a piercing beam of light enveloped one whole side of the planet, like an artificial sun. Actually, it completely eclipsed our natural sunlight. It paled in comparison. As the Earth rotated, this light seemed to cook the surface like a hydrogen-infused laser. From that point on, there were no more transmissions recorded from our shiny blue home. Cameras on the orbiting International Space Station had surreptitiously captured the extinction of mankind, save one. It was as if the whole planet had been sterilized by the mystery flash of light from outer space. This sanitation of humanity took less than 6 hours from what I could tell. I asked Max why he didn't wake me while the unexplained phenomena was going on. Perhaps proving that artificial intelligence still has a long way to go, he expressed genuine concern that I needed the sleep. It's not like I could have physically blocked the devastating light wave from my little tin can in the sky, but perhaps I could have warned those not already under its mysterious influence. Max seemed proud that he had the presence of mind to alert me when he noticed the absence of radio transmissions. In his cyber-based cognizance, his decision was thinking outside the box despite my biological need for sleep. He didn't immediately grasp the reason for my considerable agitation. As if speaking to a small child, I tried to explain that the lack of radio wave broadcasts, now, and the extreme light phenomena, then, were almost certainly related. Here I am facing the potential extinction of mankind and possibly all other animal life forms on Earth. And yet I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Go figure. Max seemed to finally come around. He was concerned that our mission on the ISS would be compromised if there were no other people left on Earth to share the data results with. That helped to bring the concept of unknown and fear to him. In his defense, there's only one of him, so losing humanity doesn't have quite the same punch as it does for me. I kept hoping for a return of regular radio transmissions and electronic signatures. I listened to that unwavering, gut-wrenching static for hours, just as I had decided that hearing nothing over the airwaves was undeniable proof of the end of everything. Things grew infinitely worse. My repeated calls to our space station partners across the globe have gone unanswered for hours. Then, out of the blue, a single, cryptic response came. I should have been relieved beyond words. The problem was that the response wasn't words at all, not from any human tongue. If I had to describe the language of what I heard over the speakers, it would be that of a sinister, insect-like screech. The response kept repeating. It was absolutely directed at me. As if on cue, Max began receiving tens of thousands of radio transmissions from all over the globe. They were similar in nature to the insectoid screeching message I'd received from the space station command center. There were no humans manning the microphones down on Earth. Max expressed confusion and concern. Even he realized the transmissions were not normal. Not by any stretch. He has the learning capacity to analyze unique vocal patterns and unknown dialects. He was already deep into transcribing the broadcasts he was recording. What he told me about them made the thought of being the last human being even worse, as if that was even possible. A giant interstellar species of flying creatures has transported to Earth in their quest for a new home. Like a swarm of traveling locusts, they drift from planet to planet, taking control of each new world and decimate its natural resources. Earth is their newest target. Perhaps in their zeal to take over the planet, I'd escaped their attention. Now I had inadvertently announced my presence, in a misunderstanding that would be hilarious if it were not the most tragic thing in the world. Max mimicked his best imitation of excitement. "They said that they are coming for you," he exclaimed. With the world of humanity over, he was genuinely worried I would be stranded on the space station by the new insect overlords. I didn't have the strength to explain what their message meant. In his level of understanding, the extinction of humanity wasn't a big deal as long as there were other biological creatures to coexist with. I'd never be able to explain that I had no intention of living among these locust-like conquerors, nor do they have any intention of letting me live. Max needed many more years to achieve that sophisticated level of comprehension. I regret that he'll never get the chance. I've grown very fond of him. I'm hoping there is still some underground resistance left among our species to take the Earth back. Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing about that, but I plan on blowing up the station when they arrive. Even if I only take out a few of them in the explosion, it will be my independent effort to help. At the end of this entry, I'll sign off for the last time and transmit my log file to ISS headquarters. I can only hope there are other survivors left to view this recording and benefit from my plan. Commander Ryan Abbott, International Space Station. August 18th, 2023. I believe today is August 29th, 2023. Unfortunately, I've lost track of the actual date, but it doesn't matter. My days have run together in the recent chaos that befell the world. I'm recording this epilogue of my escape from the ISS and subsequent mission to resist the alien conquerors of Earth, to offer an official record. For whom, I don't even know. It's simply a habit I can't seem to break. The regimented structure of an orderly government entity like NASA is drilled into a person until it becomes second nature. I'm following orders from an organization that no longer exists. It's an apocalyptic joke that no one else is around to witness. When they approached the station 11 days ago, I'd planned to use the station's self-destruct module to take out a few of the bastards with me. For all I knew, there were tens of millions of them back on Earth. If so, it would have been a hollow victory, and my martyrdom would not accomplish much. It might appear selfish, but I wanted my death and the end of my friend Max to mean more than a two-dimensional kamikaze rebellion. As the spiraling situation evolved, an opportunity arose at the last second, which I seized without hesitation. I'd theorized their species coveted the planet because they breathe oxygen the same as humans and Earth-based insects. It was sound logic, and I was right about the hunch. They required a pressurized vessel to travel through space, so I had a potential means of getting back to the planet when they returned to the surface. If I destroyed the station on their arrival, it would only kill a few. I decided that I wasn't going out that easy. You have to pick your battles, and this wasn't it for me. Once back on Earth, I hoped to eventually rendezvous with survivors and form a resistance front. First, I had to slip past them when they docked at the station. Then I had to stow away and remain fully hidden until they had satisfied their curiosity over our SOS broadcasts. I told Max my plan and instructed him to play the messages on a continuous loop over the PA system. If they believed they were automated, they might accept the station was actually unmanned. Max's AI appeared to have evolved at an accelerated pace. He intuitively understood what I was doing without me having to explain the details and nuances. I was so proud of him. His last words to me were, "Good luck, Ryan. I hope we win." There wasn't an opportunity for any long goodbyes. I told him I had to hide. He knew not to reveal my whereabouts. The alien vessel was attempting to dock at the station, but obviously they didn't have a compatible port to interface with it like the partner nations had. That bought me a little time to think. It occurred to me that Max's intelligence core was only 5 pounds. His consciousness was automatically sent to redundant data centers in Huntsville, Houston, and Cape Canaveral. It was downright foolhardy to attempt to take anything extra along with me other than food and water, but the huge advantages of having him back on Earth were worth it, 1,000 times over. If I could make it to one of those data centers and plug him into his user interface, the advanced AI would help tremendously with my new, unassigned mission. I could hardly believe it. The fate of the human race, if it still existed outside of me, rested on my shoulders. I programmed the repeating transmission on the PA and unplugged Max without a word. There was a small auxiliary bulkhead beside the dock interface which I took shelter within. I tossed Max's core and a dozen MREs in my backpack, put 3 bottles of water in the side pocket, and closed the door. You can believe me when I tell you that official weapons are not allowed on space stations for obvious reasons. Regardless of that, a man of science or creative engineering can construct a makeshift device to torch an oversized cricket if necessary. I was ready if discovered prematurely. When the aliens did manage to open the dock station portal, I was blind. I had no way of knowing how many of them were present, or if any of them remained inside their vessel. The bulkhead didn't exactly have a peephole. I waited until their inhuman squeaks and buzzing grew faint and then slightly cracked the door. They were busy searching the outer corridors and command console. I opened the door the rest of the way and crept out. Around the corner, I saw the open portal to their craft. It was the scariest thing I've ever done, but I made myself go through the threshold and into enemy territory. There was a foul stench, which I've come to realize is their species' body odor. Maybe crickets smell the same way, but the ordinary Earth variety is so small it's not noticeable. I held my makeshift torch to blast any crew members that might have remained behind. Thankfully, it was unoccupied. They sent all hands into the ISS to exterminate whatever humans they expected to encounter there. I found a hiding place and hoped I wouldn't be detected. Even if I fried all of them as they returned, I couldn't fly the ship. I had to play it smart and regroup with any survivors left on Earth. Hopefully, there were people alive in submarines, in mining operations, or sequestered in military bunkers who'd escaped the sterilization ray and electromagnetic pulse they'd inundated the surface with. Surely, the communication infrastructure was just knocked out. I didn't want to believe I was the only man left alive. An undetermined amount of time later, I felt the seal close between their vessel and the station. Then, the ship uncoupled and left. Only then did the terrifying possibility occur to me that they might not return to Earth. For all I knew, they were returning to their home planet or searching for other inhabitable planets to seize. Honestly, my main objective was to survive. Everything else was a bonus. The mission plan was shaky at best. I was flying by the seat of my pants, but the most important thing was that I was still alive. It was the only way I could achieve any of my greater objectives. As good fortune would have it, they did return to Earth. So far, everything was going my way, but I still had to escape their ship, find shelter, and hope whatever they sterilized the surface with was either temporary or no longer toxic. That was a tall order. They weren't apt to just leave the hatch open, so I either had to flee at the same time they did, or learn to operate buttons labeled in cricket. At some point, the hatch was opened to bring in supplies. It was yet another gamble, but I decided to slip out when they were otherwise occupied. It was nearing darkness, and that aided in my escape from the alien craft. I realized they can't see well in low-light conditions. Understanding that fact, as well as that their exoskeletons are not compatible with colder climates, was incredibly useful knowledge. That first night, I ran under the cover of darkness and hid in a vacant house about 6 miles from their landing point. I had no idea where I was at first, other than the western part of the United States. All the billboard advertisements listed American items. It was hot, arid-like desert conditions which suited their body temperature limitations. I wasn't even surprised when I found the Roswell, New Mexico police station, right down the street. It apparently wasn't the first time they'd been to Earth. It was incredibly strange witnessing the abandoned streets and buildings. I learned to sleep during the day and drive at night with the headlights as dim as possible. With an old paper map I found in the house, I'm slowly making my way back east to Houston in a beat-up 1968 Dodge Charger. 50 miles at a time is all I dare to travel. Once there, I'll insert Max into his AI interface and hope the circuitry at Central Command wasn't fried by the alien beam. This portable cassette recorder I'm recording my log entries on still works, but it probably doesn't have a lot of modern microchips to ruin. None of the newer cars I've tried would start. I'm hopeful some of the computer equipment is still functional in Houston, and also that I find other survivors along the way. If not, I'll keep on trucking toward Huntsville. This is Commander Ryan Abbott signing off for now. August 29th, 2023. September 8th, 2023 entry. Houston Command Center was a bust. The terminal to connect Max was completely fried. The aliens obviously used some form of electromagnetic pulse radiation to destroy all modern technology on the surface. That's the same reason why no abandoned vehicles I've found manufactured beyond the early 80s will run. They have varying degrees of computer circuitry within them. The thing is, the first space missions were successfully conducted with analog equipment. I am faced with the possibility of a low-tech guerrilla war. I'm still hoping Max can be an asset, but unless I can find an interface for him that still works, I'm completely on my own. I've had a few close calls. They run occasional surveillance sweeps to detect any surface activity. I had to lay low until the coast was clear to move again. That offset my schedule for a few days. Huntsville is probably my last hope for finding a way to get Max working again. I've been trying to record the time and dates of their operations to see if I can recognize a pattern. At this point, I don't have enough experience observing them to nail down their habits or rituals. For all I know, all their maneuvers could be completely random, but with any adversary, it's dangerous to dismiss them as disorganized. Their species brought humanity to its knees and the brink of extinction. That was no accident. I have to be careful, or the fight will be over. September 10th, 2023 log entry. Reached Huntsville. As with Houston, the main command center module and all the CPUs were toasted, but I wasn't about to give up so easily. I looked around and found a large equipment storage room in the bowels of the command center, where their earlier computers were stored. Both locations had probably upgraded equipment at the same time, but Houston chunked theirs in the trash. Good old Huntsville unplugged their outdated terminals, but tossed them in a storage room in the sub-basement in case a 1990s desktop computer might somehow be useful again. Still, even old computers were better than nothing, assuming they were not damaged. As luck would have it, the one I tried powered on. I guess the alien EMP didn't reach the basement. Why the aliens hadn't wiped out the country's entire power grid? I have no idea. I suppose there was no need. With the people gone, it didn't matter if electricity still flowed to empty homes. To call it a computer was generous, but I knew enough about the older operating systems to make it semi-functional. Whether I'd be able to connect Max to it was another story. The connector plug to the main terminal didn't interface in any way with these ancient CPUs, but as an amateur hobbyist back in the day, I had a long-shot plan. I took the AI connector interface and soldered the end of it to a PCI card. With luck, it would connect to the computer as a peripheral, like a scanner or printer. I plugged my modified PCI card into the expansion bay and rebooted. Minutes went by, and I assumed I'd ruined the computer, but it finally came up. I switched over to DOS and told it to read the modified card I'd plugged in. After an IRQ conflict was resolved by removing the jumper on the back, it eventually recognized the device. That was already more success than I could have hoped for, but it was all in vain if I couldn't interface with my friend. I plugged in Max and waited, and waited. Minutes seemed like hours. I feared his advanced circuitry required too much processing power to operate on the primitive machine, but he finally spoke.
Ryan, are you here? Where am I? Something is wrong with my interface. My connection is incredibly slow.
I read him the important details of my new log entries and explained the patchwork fix I'd employed to connect him. He was dutifully concerned that he was connected to an old Pentium 1 computer, but I explained it was possibly the only functional CPU left on the planet. He understood. Other than slurred speech and slower response time, Max was basically his regular self. He congratulated me on my daring little escape from the International Space Station and thanked me for saving his memory. It was a revealing sign he valued his existence. I told him that friends help other friends, and I was counting on his intelligence engine to formulate a plan to defeat the aliens. Fortunately for all of us, he took that request to heart.
I love a challenge,
he remarked enthusiastically. Then he offered the first bit of good news I'd heard in weeks.
I studied their vocal patterns when they first took over the airwaves. It's fascinating to deconstruct. There's a distinct, reoccurring pattern to them. It's mathematical in nature. I could simulate their speech if you need me to.
While that might have proven useful in some overly complicated, drawn-out sabotage ploy, I wasn't ready for an offensive against them, and couldn't imagine how it would help our cause. Instead, I put Max on an alternate assignment to determine if there were any other people left. If so, they had to be hiding underground. I needed Max to focus on a stealthy method to contact them. The thing about him is that once he understands an objective, he's on it. Within a few minutes, Max had some solid ideas. Even operating through an archaic 1990s desktop computer, he was firing on all cylinders.
My analysis of the alien language strongly suggests they are limited in the frequency range they can hear. That offers a technical advantage in how we could contact any survivors. By broadcasting an SOS signal in a ground-penetrating frequency they can't detect, it will allow us to reach out to them, hopefully undetected. With more humans on our side, we stand a better chance of taking back the Earth.
It was both brilliant and, much more importantly, it seemed possible. I also couldn't help but notice he'd made significant strides in his artificial intelligence algorithms in a very short period of time. His understanding of the situation had rapidly progressed until he now referred to it as our side. Only a few weeks earlier on the station, Max had been impartial and neutral in his description of the aliens versus humanity. September 12th, 2023 log entry. The two of us began working on potential means of sending an ultra-low frequency message over vast parts of the country. Radio towers transmitting our signal might attract attention, even if the aliens couldn't actually hear the message. Neither of us had enough data to know if they had deciphered the wealth of Earth languages or not, but we were pretty sure they could at least recognize the broadcasts. That severely limited what we might send out. Max happened upon a fantastic solution to bypass the potential of being heard or understood. Morse code. I still remember it from my early days in the Boy Scouts. We could send out the dots and dashes using any possible range in the audio bandwidth. Low frequencies were just as possible to broadcast them in, and could penetrate a few hundred feet into solid rock. All we needed was a means of sending it out. Hopefully, there were still people left hiding somewhere, and they could decipher our urgent message. A number of alien patrols flew over the Huntsville Command Center during those initial brainstorming sessions. I was paranoid we'd been detected somehow. If they knew I was there, it was all over. I had no means to fight back. Max tapped into a surveillance camera on the roof and recorded their maneuvers. By his analysis, it was a routine patrol covering a predictable grid latitude and longitude pattern. His theory was proven correct when he knew the precise time they would return. If nothing else, it offered a greater level of clarity about their species. They were methodical and organized. If they always followed the same pattern of patrols, it was easier to avoid detection. Of course, it was a little dangerous to assume they never deviated from the recognized pattern, but all we could do was record the data as it occurred, and then look for anomalies in their procedures. September 14th, 2023 log entry. I located a Defense Department radar station a few miles away and set off to program a repeating Morse code message. Max had mapped out a rudimentary grid of the alien patrol with his best estimation of when they were completely out of the sector. I'd written down a longhand version of the message so there were no errors in our broadcast. The whole thing was a long shot, but I still wasn't prepared to accept I was the last remaining human on Earth. I had to leave him behind, and that was scary. He was literally my only friend, and I was terrified something might happen in my absence. I never once thought I might be caught myself or worried about that. It didn't matter. Every day I remained alive was a gift for which I wasn't promised. I would keep fighting them until I couldn't. Max continued at the command center to record alien behavior and analyze it. I left him doing his thing and promised to return as soon as possible. I hoped I could keep my word. At the radar station, like a damn fool, I set off a security alarm trying to gain entrance. My blood turned ice cold as the wail of piercing sirens glared on for what seemed like a freaking hour. At any moment, I expected them to arrive and zap me with some Sci-Fi ray gun. Finally, I located the kill switch and shut the damn thing off. But I was so rattled by the oral spotlight on my presence that I had to lie down. It was nearly 30 minutes before I stopped shaking. Once inside the facility, I wandered around aimlessly, trying to find the control center. It's not like the Department of Defense had a step-by-step dummies guidebook on how to broadcast rogue SOS signals in Morse code. The radar station was there to detect terrestrial aircraft. It wasn't designed to do what I needed it to do, nor was I trained or qualified to operate the equipment, even if it was. By the clearest definition, I was flying by the seat of my pants. September 15th, 2023 log entry. The station computer systems were destroyed anyway, but I did locate an analog terminal. Amazingly, it looked pretty new. Perhaps the DoD made alternate allowances for the possibility of electromagnetic pulse attacks. It's not like it was telegraph equipment, but with a little ingenuity I managed to fabricate a reasonable facsimile to transmit. Once I'd adjusted it to the lowest frequency it could simulate, I initiated our rogue broadcast. I desperately hoped Max's theories were correct, and someone was out there to hear and understand it. If not, our underdog mission was basically over.
This is Ryan Abbott, the former commander aboard the International Space Station. I awoke that horrible morning to find the Earth below me had fallen silent. Then, I discovered the devastation of the alien invasion. Is there anyone left out there receiving this message? I stowed away in one of their spaceships after they detected my presence on the station. Please reply to this transmission so we can work together to take the Earth back.
I repeated the message twice before making an embarrassing realization. While I'd managed to improvise a broadcast device to get the message out there, I completely forgot about how I was going to receive responses. Even if human survivors heard and understood my Morse code message and responded to it, I had no means of hearing their responses back to me. I felt like an idiot. I scrambled to adjust the equipment at the radar station to scan for incoming Morse code transmissions. It took a while, but I adjusted the transceiver to seek them out. I didn't know how far my broadcast carried, nor did I know if there was anyone left on the planet to hear it. I was terrified I'd foolishly announced my presence to the aliens. I'd told Max I might be away for a few days, because I was prepared to wait it out as long as it took. The mission was simple: to find other survivors. Listening to static airwaves is mind-numbing, and the concept of elapsed time is a thing of the past. No clocks or watches function, but in reality it wasn't very long before a message started repeating over the speaker system. I was so excited that I failed to record the sequence until it started over. The organized dots and dashes came through loud and clear. I jotted them down on a legal pad I found on the desk. Because I was very rusty at translating the mostly forgotten code, I had to spell out the incoming text, longhand like a game of hangman. As excited as I was to be finally receiving an external response, I couldn't believe what it actually said. I had to check the text 3 times. What was Kramer's first name? I read and reread the bizarre, cryptic message in disbelief. Of all the things to say to my request, it was pretty damn hilarious to make a television show reference. Luckily, I watched the show religiously and knew the answer. Cosmo, I messaged back. Almost immediately, the follow-up message came in. Thank heavens, you are real. Under the circumstances, we couldn't be too careful. I was afraid it was a clever ruse by the aliens to flush us out in the open and exterminate us. The thing is, even if they'd mastered Morse code, they wouldn't be able to answer a random question like that. That's why I asked. I have to protect our people. This is Major David Hubbard. Good to meet you, David. I tapped on the transmitter. I'm so relieved to not be alone down here. Getting your response makes everything I've gone through worthwhile. By your statement, I take it there are others. Likewise, Commander. Yes, there are a number of us. We've been holed up since it all began. So, you were on the ISS? Our unit has been waiting for the right moment and circumstances to reactivate. We've just been biding our time. It was brilliant of you to use Morse code to contact us. Few people know it anymore. Luckily, I did. It's unlikely the aliens would know it either, but I wasn't about to take any chances and risk our safety until I'd cleared you. We are also in touch with several other survivor groups. There were so many good things within those incoming broadcast dots and dashes. It was amazing. I wanted to ask Major Hubbard their location, but I figured he was still nervous and wanted to maintain operational security a little bit longer. It never occurred to me before, but then the same paranoid idea entered my mind that they might be aliens posing as survivors, so I'd let my guard down. Keeping our location secret from each other in the beginning was a mission safety mechanism. David and I talked back and forth for a couple of days to discuss pertinent details and vet each other. Little by little, he disclosed more information about their people, and I was greatly encouraged. They were a National Guard unit that quickly took shelter in a government bunker. That building was luckily shielded from the alien sterilization. Via very old-school military communication equipment, they were in semi-regular contact with a few other pockets of survivors across the county. A few of the groups were even outside the continental U.S. Not all of the survivors were armed service members, though. Some were survivalist nuts, coal miners, deep-sea divers, or just fortunate souls from different walks of life who'd managed to avoid extermination, either from dumb luck or happy coincidence. Regardless, every person who'd beaten the odds had different life experiences and brought unique perspectives to the table. It was us versus them, and the more individuals we had on the side of humanity, the better our chances of reversing the apocalypse we are mired in. After a half-dozen chats with David and his hidden group, I decided to spill the beans and reveal my location. The barriers of distrust had crumbled. I think he was just waiting for me, and I was waiting for him. I explained where the radar station was, and suggested we all work together if they, and the other splinter groups they were in contact with, were close enough to travel to Huntsville. I told David all about Max's capabilities, and how I had him hardwired to an old desktop PC. Their rations were almost exhausted, so it wasn't a difficult decision. Under the cover of darkness, the National Guard Regiment hoped to reach Huntsville in 3 or 4 nights. They were only one state over in Savannah, Georgia. David informed the other factions about his unit's plan to leave the bunker and join me. I encouraged him to suggest they do the same, but to travel in staggered stages to avoid detection. Any slip-up or capture could derail our momentum and possibly be a death sentence for us. Most of them did not have telegraph communication capability. They would have to travel in radio silence over a great distance, and we would have no means of knowing their status. David provided them with Max's alien patrol schedule so they could map a safe route and avoid drawing attention to themselves. It was the only help we could offer. After that, I rigged up a looped message to broadcast on repeat in case there were other survivors. In the end, I decided not to use it. The aliens were technically savvy. I was afraid they might become aware of the rogue broadcast and zero in on us. Sending it out before was a gamble on my part, because there didn't seem to be much to lose. Once I'd confirmed there were others, the risks were too great to continue. There was a real danger of expanding the operation too rapidly. On the way back to the command center, I scouted for food sources. We'd soon have a lot more mouths to feed. There was a major grocery store chain supply hub just a few miles down the road that was perfect for resources. I loaded up the back seat with bulk necessities and carried them into the building.
Ryan!
Max was enthusiastically happy I returned. I'd taught him to greet me like Norm on the show Cheers whenever I enter the room. I wonder if he considered the possibility I might be dead from my dangerous mission. If I never returned to the command center, would he remain working on the data and parameters indefinitely? Or would he eventually give up on a mission that was pointless? I didn't know what his programming would dictate nor what his intuitive learning module might realize. Being tethered to a 1990s computer processor was definitely a potential handicap in itself. I found other human survivors, I told him. They are on the way here to work with us on the mission. His display visibly brightened upon hearing the positive news. I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing, or there was a power surge, but the pitch in his simulated voice softened too, and went up part of an octave. I could hardly believe what I'd just witnessed. Max had apparently taken it upon himself to adjust the computer brightness and volume settings to emulate human-like expressions of good feelings and empathy. Just like his fragile, carbon-based makers, our little man was growing up. Max was evolving. When Major Hubbard's reserve unit arrived, I hurried them inside and showed them around the command center. There were living quarters on the premises down below, but not nearly enough to handle 45 new people. David and I assigned quarters for the extra members of his troops, using a number of unused offices. It was crowded, but, according to them, practically spacious compared to the cramped bunker they left. That night, we ate a hearty meal and gave thanks for having the opportunity to fight another day. The Major requested a detailed rundown of all my experiences since the invasion. My coded explanation earlier over the airwaves had been rudimentary. He hoped to capitalize on some detail that hadn't occurred to me. As I soon discovered, he's quite a cunning strategist. I described the interior of their spacecraft, the landing site location, and also Max's crucial observations. At first, David dismissed the idea of Max having any useful input. He was understandably underwhelmed by seeing him plugged into an old beige desktop computer like an oversized laser printer. That was, until Max's predictions of the next alien sweep came true, down to the minute. While the strange vessels flew overhead in a grid reconnaissance pattern, we were wisely hidden and deathly quiet. David grinned as soon as they were gone. Max had proven himself. "Way to go, Max. My man." Max's monitor screen contrast shifted back and forth dramatically at the accolade. That was the AI equivalent of blushing, I believe. After that, Major Hubbard and the rest of his officers were very interested in working with their new silicon-based friend. I explained how he had also translated their language and suggested using Morse code to send out the message. For all the effort it took to reconnect his interface, it had paid off. His contributions were absolutely essential to our continued survival. Like most units, the soldiers had varied and complementary skill sets, and the Major was highly efficient at utilizing their talents. Understandably, morale was low prior to connecting with myself and Max. Everyone had lost their families. Hope was gone. But discovering our ambitious efforts gave the troops a reason to keep going. The feeling of lifted spirits was mutually contagious. David and I focused on short-term strategy and survival goals. If the off-grid survivors also made it to Huntsville, we would have the makings of a considerable guerrilla army and adequate human resources to keep going. Mine was typically the voice of hope and unjustified optimism. David, on the other hand, was more of a realist. He thought in terms of what if. His mind actively considered worst-case scenarios, no matter how much it might have brought down our personal momentum. I didn't understand it at the time, but being polar opposites in perspective worked incredibly well for us. We took each other's thoughts into consideration and found middle ground. I assumed Roswell, New Mexico, was their home base, or at least a regional hub. It made sense to me for us to build up our numbers, gather up our weapons, and then take the fight to them there. Major Hubbard's unit brought their weapons and gear with them. But what good is a few dozen military rifles against a super colony of giant grasshoppers? David was quick to remind me how hopelessly outclassed and outnumbered we were against an unconventional enemy with conventional weapons. Also, the more of us who traveled together, the greater the risk of detection. As much as I hated to admit it, he was right to discourage my headstrong war ideas. It would have been personal suicide to martyr ourselves directly at them with no thought-out plans. We also didn't know if any of the other groups were coming to Huntsville, or how much time it would take. How big could our army become if we waited a little while longer for others to arrive? I was angry because I wanted to act immediately. I feared we might be wiped out if we waited too long to strike. David had been taught the strategic value of choosing the right time to enter a battle. For all my hollow bluster and bravado, I knew we were minimally prepared. His patience bought us something of paramount importance: time. Max, perhaps weary of our spirited debates and indecisiveness, brought the rest.
Gentlemen, I have a very unorthodox idea, but I'd like you to hear me out. Before the internet ceased, I did a research on the International Space Station on the rhythmic language of Orthoptera, Calyphera, and Incifera. That is, terrestrial grasshoppers, locusts, crickets, katydids, and the like. The aliens who have invaded the Earth are undoubtedly related. While a different dialect, the patterns of how they communicate are incredibly similar. What I'm alluding to is that it's good to know our enemy.
David and I looked at each other in perplexed bemusement. Neither of us had any idea where Max was going with his vocabulary-laced diatribe.
Perhaps language is a poor word for how they actually communicate, but I'm using that terminology here for demonstrative purposes. They don't have specific words or phrases like humans do. Know what I mean? These insects, both terrestrial and the larger interstellar variety, operate more on strong feelings or general commands. While I'm not actually a master of their language, I understand it well enough to follow the conversation.
I followed his thoughts as he slowly offered them, but I couldn't fully see where Max was headed with them. David, on the other hand, was grinning like a damned fool. He was a little ahead of me. I could tell there was a stroke of brilliance coming in the narrative that I wanted to understand too.
Without exaggeration, there are tens of billions of these arthropod insects living on Earth. They are tribal. They are highly territorial. Their motivations are simply to mate and to eat. That's pretty much all they care about. Like a disciplined military organization, they have a ranking hierarchy and order. The strongest are followed without question. If I tell them a rival tribe has come here to steal their females and eat their food, they will swarm and fight their alien cousins. Sure, the earthbound varieties of these insects are dozens of times smaller than their highly evolved foreign relatives. But in the massive numbers they possess, they would attack them with a swarm ferocity and effectiveness we couldn't come close to equaling with our limited resources. Swarms of enraged terrestrial grasshoppers and crickets directed at them would unknowingly become our greatest natural allies.
It was sneaky biological warfare in ways we would have never dreamed possible, and just crazy enough to work. It also had the added merit of turning their similar species against each other. Max synthesized the all-out attack command. Meanwhile, David and I discussed the pros and cons of putting our cards all out on the table. There would be no putting the genie back in the bottle. Once the unapologetic call to war was made, it was absolutely on. We were finished playing it safe. Max's organic idea of fighting fire with fire was by far our strongest option. Having an armed escort to the radar station was great. We broadcast Max's diabolic composition on a loop and watched in amazement as actual clouds of winged warriors took flight. I'm not sure how they knew where to go, but westward they flew. In case the aliens came to destroy the source of the uprising against them, David sent several of his officers to nearby radio towers to repeat the rebellion signal in multiple places. We spread the insect propaganda far and wide. In all, we managed to blanket the entire southeastern region of the United States with the sweet, sweet leg scrapings of full-on locust rage. I also transmitted an informative shortwave message on global wide bandwidth frequencies explaining Max's creative method of warfare. That, along with the included audio file, would prove incredibly useful to other survivors listening across the world. Witnessing the blitzkrieg of biological warfare and the massive insect-on-insect fireworks over the next few weeks was something I'll never forget. Thankfully, there wasn't a protracted skirmish or necessary involvement from us, because we were woefully unprepared for that. As courageous as it would have been to valiantly lead the charge against them, we simply called on our arthropod allies and kept out of the way. Turns out, earth grasshoppers, locusts, crickets, and katydids really do not want to share their food or females. Lucky us. It's been nearly 18 months since Grasshopper Geddon. I'd love to take full credit for saving the planet from deadly space arthropods, but it was Max's clever employment of organic warfare that made it possible. That, and David's grounded approach to the daunting problem facing us. 98% of the human population had been wiped out overnight, but scattered pockets of survivors across the globe will build everything back. I have full confidence in that. We must also prepare for the unpleasant possibility of another attack someday. Just because we repelled these pesky invaders once doesn't mean there won't be another wave of them arriving in the future. There are surely other colonies lurking out there within the cosmos. We must be vigilant to possible retaliation. With future technological advancements, perhaps we can erect a protective force field around the planet to foil future invasions. I have the perfect individual to put on the task. All hail my best pal Max, the greatest friend to the human race ever. Commander Ryan Abbott, signing off.